but it wasn't. I know it sounds like when I say this to people and they think, "Wow, you lived in your car for almost 2 years." Well, yeah, but you don't understand. I was young and I was hungry, so I was willing to do whatever I had to do. It wasn't always easy and comfortable, but I was on a mission.
Welcome to the Funny in Failure podcast, a podcast that celebrates failure and shines the light on the emotional side of comedy, with yours truly, Michael Kahan.
This is a brilliant and all-inspiring chat. Sergio has an amazing story with unique insights and reflections. If anyone has reached enlightenment, it is this man. He is a calm, gentle soul with a great and relaxing voice. I love it when people walk the talk, and it's crazy and inspiring how much he loves what he does, still looking at ways to grow and improve. It is brilliant to hear. Needless to say, I was blown away by this chat, and I had an absolute blast, and I think you will too. Just a heads up, for roughly the first 8 to 12 minutes or so, it occasionally lags. Then the Zoom gods come in and correct it, and it's all smooth sailing from there. Also, Sergio has the most beautiful website. It's pererasergio.com, or you can click the link in the episode notes to see the masterpiece of a website. Okay, let's get into it. Sergio Perera is a chef and nutrition expert. Having trained as a professional chef in some of Spain's most respected restaurants and then training in Japan, an unexpected moment saw Sergio become the go-to private chef to Hollywood actors, such as Tom Cruise, Robert Downey Jr., Leonardo DiCaprio, Chris Hemsworth, athletes, royalty, and politicians. Growing up in Spain, he was naturally an advocate for the healthy Mediterranean diet, but was working with actors, which prompted him to study and learn more about nutrition, and during his time with Chris Hemsworth, helped him prepare for the role Thor. He was also an integral part of the successful training app known as Center by Chris Hemsworth, writing recipes, diet programs, and meditations, offering subscribers a holistic wellness approach. Sergio's love for food and cooking began in his grandfather's kitchen, where he learned the traditional cuisine of the Aragon region. At the age of 18, he set off to expand his repertoire of Spanish cuisine by training at some of the world's most prestigious restaurants. His curiosity and passion for culture eventually led him to Japan, where he was introduced to Kaiseki, which is an exquisite form of dining that moves elegantly and poetically with the seasons. Sergio has used his culinary and artistic experience to create beautiful and inspirational images for food books, magazines, and film productions. He's currently the brand ambassador for Winning Appliances, working alongside John Winning's team on numerous culinary and creative projects. So as you can imagine, we dive deep and we cover a lot, and we chat about his life-changing time in Japan, intuition, mindfulness, living in his car, creativity and flow, molecular gastronomy, and working with the masters, the new chef, vulnerability, moving to Australia and working with Chris Hemsworth, love of music, fear, and of course food, plus plenty more. Before we get into this epic chat, in case you aren't aware, the videos are now available on YouTube under Michael Kahan. That's Kahan with a K, unless you're listening to it already. I'll still be posting snippets of these chats on Instagram under Funny in Failure, so check them out if you want to stay in the loop for upcoming episodes, or you want to ask a guest a question. I'd also love it if you would share the podcast or share your takeaways from the chat. It really motivates me, helps the podcast grow, and ensures I can lock in amazing guests like this one. And just as a final reminder, the podcast comes out at 3:30 Melbourne, Australian time, with the full video of the podcast to be released the following day. Okay, cool. Thank you. Let's get into it. Oh, this could be a good place to start. I saw initially in your career, you wanted to be a musician, but then you moved to pastry, or you got into pastry school, and you said no to that. Can you tell me what was going on at the time?
Oh, I think the reason why I kind of said no to that was because ask any chef this question, they'll tell you that pastry or doing desserts, just pastries in general, is a lot more of a science, right? It's so specific.
Yeah.
Very little room for improvisation. And when I thought about that, when I was considering getting into that part of the culinary world, I was a bit I was a bit intimidated by the fact that there were going to be so many rules, so much structure,
Oh,
because
interesting.
savory cooking, there's so much room for improvisation.
Yep.
It's easy to mess up a sauce, or redo a piece of fish or a piece of steak. But when you're doing something as precise as, I don't know, let's just say pastry, or a croissant, it's not that easy to just, all right, just get another piece of dough and then throw it back in the oven. There's so much, there's so much, so many steps and such a huge process to get such a beautiful thing down. There's so many layers. And coming from, look, I was before I actually started doing restaurants, I was classically trained. So my goal was to be a composer. Now, of course, when you talk about music, there's obviously a lot of structure there.
Yeah.
But the direction that I wanted to go to with music was going to be a lot more loose. There was going to be a lot more freedom. The idea of being a film composer really, really.
Interesting.
Yeah. So that was the thing. I think that I've always been, I wouldn't say intimidated, but I've always not enjoyed rules.
Yep.
I've just always been anti-rules. If I don't have complete freedom to do, whatever it is creatively on my terms, I guess you can say, I kind of push back. And that was the reason why when I was getting ready to make this transition, and to be honest, it wasn't a transition that I originally really wanted or thought it would last. But I did it. And, as soon as I realized, whoa, this is going to be a lot more challenging than I thought, I'm quite comfortable doing the cooking that I've been doing for such a long time. I don't think I'm going to go that route. I'm going to stay in the savory section where I can be sort of a composer and write my own music and my own methods and get the instruments that I want.
Yeah.
And I'm just going to go that way. I don't want to be restricted. So that's how it kind of evolved.
Interesting. Do you ever look back and go, what would my life have looked like if I, pursued the musician route, the composing, or even, being a pastry chef?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, look, I still dabble in a lot of music when I can. I love playing the piano. Every now and then, just for fun, I'll write a score. I'll get, I'll find some beautiful, some kind of a video that's got beautiful imagery, and then I'll kind of just, I'll mute it, and then I'll write my own idea of what kind of music to put over that.
Cool.
So I still kind of dabble in that. I love jazz. The idea of being a jazz, pianist, always really just excites me. I wish I would have had that. Wish I would have stayed with that, because there's so much appreciation that I love about that craft. But of course, the same thing goes for pastry. I think there's a lot of chefs out there that do savory cooking. There's very few that are amazing at pastry, and it's a very sought after, profession in the hospitality world because it's so complex. And there's definitely, when you achieve, there's bigger achievements to look for when you're doing pastry, because it is so complex. It is an exact science. You can't just, throw a little bit of this, throw a little bit of that. It's got to be measured. It's got to be weighed. It's got to be considered. So there's a lot of incredible pastry chefs out there that have, really changed the whole game. Not to say that it hasn't been done in the savory world.
Yeah.
But it's not as common, but I do. Because I did learn a few things. I do make some pastries when I can, and they're always a little bit more complex than what the normal thing is. And I'm not, not to say that I wouldn't make an apple pie or something as easy as that. But I love the complexity. I love the challenge. But again, it's always got to be on my terms. And I've always found that I somehow really push myself into being in chaos. I really thrive in
Oh,
chaos. And look, to be honest, folks, sometimes I just hate it, right? It's like, why would I do this? This is the
yep.
stupidest thing I could have ever done. But for some reason, there's this beauty in chaos. And I guess I always look at how music affects me and how music is written by a lot of my favorite artists. And it's a very similar process. So which is why I've always made my decisions in cooking that exact way,
Oh,
and
yep.
I never, for to give you a quick little example, I never write menus. I've never written menus. When I've done stuff in the past and people ask me, well, what's cooking? What are you making? I always tell them I don't know. I get whatever I have, the best available, and I just kind of ride as I go,
Yep.
and that's what I used to do with music. So it's a feeling, it's an intuition.
Yes.
So there's a lot of resemblance in that.
Would you say that you're a very intuitive guy? Like I've got a few quotes about how you've used intuition to help guide you in the kitchen, but it sounds like you apply that, in life as well.
I do look. I think we're all very intuitive in our own way,
But
right?
we can all block it and ignore it or think it's
Yeah,
the wrong
but
thing to do. Yeah.
exactly. But we're also the ones that complicate that. That we don't allow ourselves to be intuitive sometimes because we're overthinking.
Yeah.
But the moment that you really kind of sort of let go, and once you get past the fear or the anxiety or the uncertainty of something, and you kind of just throw yourself into the fire and just accept, all right, well, this is what it is. That's when things like start to happen, right? You just
Yes.
automatically move fluidly through anything. But we're humans. We do get scared. We do get intimidated. We do question things. We question everything sometimes. But I think that I always kind of, once I get past that little bump, then I just kind of go, and whatever comes, it comes, and I just take it to the direction that it's meant to go.
Oh, so you can like hear it, feel it, and go, okay, I'm
Yeah.
just gonna take it for what it is. You don't often get into your head and go, oh, but it sounds like you've like mastered. This is a life skill. I love this. So you just this is the idea. We're going.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, it is. I mean, so a lot of the people that I've been influenced by are still kind of learning that process, even though I think they're geniuses at it, and they do it without thinking. But because of the way I've been raised and all the traveling that I've done at such a young age, being an only child, you kind of put in a situation where you have to just figure things out, right? You're not going to have people around you constantly telling you, guiding you. Um, it's a process that you do develop as you experience, and fortunately, I've been able to pick that up and use it, to the best that I can, and it's always guided me. It's always allowed me to accomplish amazing things, and yeah, it's just a process. Look, it's an everyday process. Sometimes I feel like I didn't achieve it. A lot of the times I feel like I didn't achieve it. In fact, I mean,
Yep.
the way I always look at it is I'm never really satisfied with what I do. It's always an agreement. Like, okay, I'll let that go. You know.
Can you expand on the agreement side? Because you're speaking my language. It resonates
Yeah, I
deeply.
mean, look, as as a perfectionist, whatever that means. It's taken me a long time to understand that perfection really doesn't exist. It's the process that teaches you, not the end result, right?
Yeah.
I always catch myself looking at what I do or what I create, and then I'll look at it and I'll look at it and I'll look at and I always see something that could be changed, that could be modified. Oh wait, this could have been better. Wait, maybe this, maybe this. And if I just allow myself to do that, it'll never stop. And I'll never be able to share it because I won't want to give it away. So the best thing to do is just say, all right, well, this is what I've done, and let it go, and I could always pick it up at another time. But it wasn't easy to do that in my earlier years, you know,
I can
to
imagine.
the point where yeah, to the point where I would be so obsessed by it that I wouldn't even I wouldn't get to the point where I was able to share it, you know, or I would miss out on an opportunity, or or miss out on something else that could have come from that, you know, because I really do believe that the best way to really get a bigger perspective of something is to let it go, you know, because then you can really step back and be like, okay, that I see what you're saying, or I see what I've done, and rather than holding it in your hand, just
Yeah.
keep it at a distance and just look at it.
Do you mean like from the sense of like, for example, if you're cooking and you've got the perfectionism brain in your mind and you're like, oh, I could have done this, I could have done that. But then realizing that you've probably done a great job and just go, you know what, it's great. I can learn from this experience. I've done something great and then I can share in that idea. But if you're constantly overthinking or being like, I could have done this, I could have done that, then perhaps you don't want to share it because you're questioning whether it's good enough. Is that what you're alluding to as well?
Yes, exactly. Because I mean, look, like I said, anybody who has a craft or is creative will always know that there's a piece of you or that is always being uh, offered, and whatever it is, whether it's big or small, I think that the fact that you've done it and you've achieved it's okay, it's healthy to let it go,
Yeah.
and I know I've got a lot of people who are artists, or chefs or musicians, and when they don't allow themselves to just let go of certain things, that's when you reach that point where it's, I guess, the equivalent of what writer's block is, right?
Yeah.
Because you're overanalyzing, you're becoming very cerebral when really it's a feeling. And that's where a lot of the intuition comes from, because we think that no, it's up here where we've got to be intelligent up here, but no, it's a lot of it is how you feel, how it feels. So
Yes.
I've always been big on that. I really have been.
It's such a good point, and I do screenwriting, for example, and I've
Yeah.
learned the structure of a screenplay, the arcs, when characters should say certain things, or when there's a high point or like midpoint, all these different like terminology. If I didn't say that well, and then I meditate to get my ideas, and I've written most of my screenplays through meditation. And then when it comes, I'm like, no, it has to be this way. I'm overthinking because the structure says it has to be this way. And every time
Yeah.
that I allow like the human brain to come in, I like block it and ruin it because that's just my lesson is just to let it flow, put it on paper, and then see it slowly unravel. But the human
Yeah.
perfectionist is like, no, I need to have an arc. This paragraph needs to be amazing. That's not worded properly. And it's been a bit of I wouldn't say a struggle, but I've got a new screenplay coming up. And it's
Right.
just like that. What's that balance? And I'm just learning, let it go. Just write. Even if it's the worst scene in the world, just write, just get it down. So I'm wondering if that like resonates with you because it's been a journey for me as well.
It does. I mean, it's funny how we really are our own roadblocks, right? It's like I guess the way to describe it almost, it's like having a roadmap and seeing where you are and where you want to be. And it's as clear as you can possibly get. There's the road. These are directions. This is where you're going to go. And it would be like me trying to rewrite it as I'm driving to my destination when it's clear. It's like, well, why would I rewrite it and try and draw my own map when I already have
Yeah,
the
you get
map?
it like
Right. Just get to the destination and that's it. There's no need. You're gonna come across things anyway. You're gonna come across a roadblock or an accident or whatever. But the destination is there. It hasn't changed. So the same thing with a goal. Like if I have a goal to, I don't know. Like I'm very big on discovering new cooking techniques. Well, if I have an idea of what I want to create, I always, the only way to start that process is to utilize what I already have. And then from there, I start kind of, okay, well, if I do this normally, then maybe I could tweak it by doing this or adding this technique or adding this temperature. And then it kind of slowly, starts to take shape. But if I start, if I start saying, well, wait a minute, I don't like the way that this happened or that happened. Well, I can't really say that because I'm not giving it a chance to get to where it needs to be. So we create all these layers that really don't need to be there when really it's like, all right, well, it's how does it feel? How does it? Is it any resemblance to what I want it to be?
That what you kind of follow the feeling? Because, potentially as a chef, the result is I have to get this steak out or this fish out. And a lot of chefs are like, I'm just going to do whatever it takes to get it out. But it sounds like you allow for the play and the fun. And as you said, you can dance in the chaos. So you just follow that feeling. Is that what's kind of...
Yeah, that's exactly it. I mean, it's like I said, if you mess up a piece of fish or a piece of steak, I mean, there's no, you can't redo it and do it quicker. Everything requires time. It's specific time to get it to a certain temperature, to get it to a certain point. It takes a specific amount of time. You can't, quickly start over again and then just throw it in there like, all right, let's do it as quickly as I possibly can just to get the end result. No, there's a process, which is why, cooking is so complicated. Not a lot of people understand the process involved in cooking. There's so much preparation. 80% of it is preparation.
Oh, wow.
The other 20%, the other 20% is just putting it together and making sure you don't burn something.
That's a good analogy for life as well, doing the work before the actual work. Yeah,
exactly. Well, it is. Isn't there some? There's a motto that's similar to that. Isn't like something along the lines of some preparation. I don't know how that goes.
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Like completely, but I'm sure you've heard it. But it is preparation. Really is everything. And it's something that I really, really try to live by constantly, and not just in my cooking, but in anything that I do, because I'm also starting to do a lot of writing as well, and I'm finding myself doing the same thing. Yeah,
writing in terms of writing recipes, menus.
Well, I mean, I do write recipes, but I'm not a writer per se. But
you are. If you've written, you're a writer. But continue.
Yeah, but I'm in the process of. I've got some ideas to write. Well, there's things that I'm writing that are kind of documentary style about food and culture. Yeah, but I do love the idea of writing some beautiful stories related to cooking and just the craft of creativity. And when I say, writing, I say, maybe possibly, hopefully something for whether a TV show or even a film related to that process. And, and I'm finding myself doing the same exact thing.
Speaking with confidence is going to happen with your awareness. It's going to happen. You are a writer. I want you to. That's your homework. You're going to say 100 times you're a writer. That's brilliant. And isn't it? It kind of goes back like a full circle. You're going to get the screenplays. You've already been on TV. You're going to do the docos and all of that stuff. Isn't it kind of crazy when you first thought you wanted to do film composing, and now you're going to like come back another way and hopefully do the film composing on top of that as well. A lot of options.
It's funny that you say that, because I always did think to myself, for so long, like as my craft has been cooking, but for so long I've always been an artist. I studied music. I loved art. I love painting. I love film, and I love cooking. So I think a lot of what I'm trying to do now with the writing and my creative process is how can I incorporate all of those elements, right? Food, amazing. Film, music. I'm still trying to figure out how, but like you just said, I would love to be able to write a film on a beautiful story about maybe a chef or another creative, right? And then me, writing the score for it. That'd be amazing.
I'm excited for you, and I reckon you can do that. You can even, we'll get into your journey. You can even base it on yourself, or like I'm not giving you advice on what to do. You know what you need to do. Exactly. But often like different chefs and the ones that have inspired you, you can put elements of you can follow like the journey of one person you've done. There's so much that you can do there, and we'll uncover your story as well. Maybe we should do a bit of the start as well to build up, because you've got a wonderful and very unique journey. I don't know anyone that's quite had the journey that you've had, and I think that's also credit to you honoring your intuition and just, you know, saying yes. But let's start, you know, at the well, I wouldn't say the beginning, but, you know, we mentioned that you wanted to be you know, film composer, and then you got into the baking school. I think it was a very famous pastry school, sorry, in San Sebastian. I think you got in, but then your grandfather, who we'll talk about in a bit, your grandfather said, I actually think this would be a better opportunity for you. What was that opportunity, and how did it change your life?
That opportunity was to do an apprenticeship at a very well-known restaurant in San Sebastian, which is still open.
Oh, wow.
It's by the name of ARZAK. How would I describe this restaurant? This restaurant is he's still alive. He's in his 80s now.
Brilliant.
His name is Juan Maria Arzak, and his daughter Elena Arzak. He was the grandfather of modern gastronomy. During the 90s, there was this huge movement in you know, modern gastronomy coming out of Spain, where it was all these really unique techniques were coming out from under the woodwork. It was crazy, and it was this era that developed that ultimately became molecular gastronomy, and this restaurant was doing a lot of that. There's a few others, but the main one was this one, and another one that I ultimately ended up going to work at. But he was doing very unique things. Now, what made it so unique, and why I chose to do it, and why my grandfather thought I should do it, was they were taking very, very old traditional recipes, right? But then they were incorporating, you know, other types of world cuisines, and they were incorporating methods that had never been done before. It wasn't like just getting, you know, a piece of meat and, you know, okay, well, let's braise this piece of meat and then, you know, serve it with the sauce. It was like, no, instead of serving it with the sauce, we're gonna serve it with a foam that's been frozen. So when you put it on top, it looks like, you know, a piece of sea foam, but it's actually solid. And when you crack it, it's completely deteriorates over the meat. You know, just as an example, right? Yeah. It was a lot of, for lack of a better word, there was a lot of theatrics to it all, right? But there were methods that weren't just for the entertainment aspect of it, but it did change. It added an extra layer of the whole eating experience, you know, because eating is it's such a powerful experience when you're smelling, you're tasting, you're listening. It's very auditory. There's so many things happening. It's very colorful. So you're being, you know, you're being taken away into this world where you just all of your senses are just being mesmerized. And this restaurant was doing that. They were doing some things, and, you know, if you research it, you would see what I mean. But this guy was doing some incredible things, and from that, my grandfather's reason for that was because he knew that he had already taught me everything I needed to know for the traditional side of what we did in our culture. At
such a young age, he was already. Oh, nice.
Yeah, well, I mean, you know, especially where I was from, we were like our region, which is the Aragon region, because I was born in Zaragoza, Spain. They were known for their braises, heavy on the meats, a lot of sauces. There's a lot of very traditional Southern French influences. But for the most part, it was its own. Spanish cuisine's got so many influences from everywhere, from Africa, from everywhere, right? But it was the braises, and, you know, so a lot of that I learned how to do. But my grandfather said, "Well, you need to go learn something you've never done before that still has to do with your craft." And when I saw what this guy was doing, it was otherworldly.
Oh, cool!
I mean, I really was. So as a kid, of course, I mean, I would have been 16, 17, somewhere there. It was like a kid at a candy store, right? It's like walking into, a music room and seeing instruments you'd never seen before from other parts of the world,
Nice.
and wanting to play them, like, because they had such unique sounds.
Yep.
It was the same thing. And you still had the same. It was a restaurant. I remember vividly. The restaurant was set up like a traditional restaurant, almost traditional brigade style, French brigade style. You had your sections. Your cold sections, your hot section, your bigger sections. And the chefs wore the traditional long French hats, everything. But it was like walking into a science lab. It was so quiet. It wasn't your typical kind of loud and crazy energy kitchens where things are banging, like
Yeah.
people are yelling. It was like being in a hospital almost. It was just so quiet and so fluid. And that's when it's funny because you're going to notice that I bring this quite a bit because I always make the comparisons to music, but it was like watching a symphony, where you had your sections, right? Your string section, your percussions, all that. And
Yep.
every section had a purpose, and every section, followed each other at certain moments. And that's what that kitchen was like. It was just consistent.
It just sounds like full of harmony. Like you just enter and it's a place of just like angelic light, if that makes sense. And it's just like,
Yeah,
wow, what is like, as you said, unworldly or I forget the word. That would be so exciting. And
it
also
is.
yeah.
Yeah, it is. It totally is. And I remember I was so excited to be in the kitchen because I remember my first day just walking in and I was mesmerized by all these professionals, right? And then looking at things that were just I'd never seen before, colors, different types of textures, different types of machines. And I remember at one point I was so overwhelmed. It was on my first day, and like during the day, I was so overwhelmed that I had to kind of go take myself to a corner of the kitchen, and I actually remember closing my eyes and just because it was visually too much, right? So I closed my eyes, and then I just remember listening, and it literally sounded like a symphony. It was melodic, and it was and there was and then from that point it kind of gave me a sense of peace because music was something that always brought me joy, always brought me if I was ever in a certain mood and I wanted to be inspired or uplifted, I would listen to classical music or opera with my grandfather while we'd be cooking. So I would close my eyes and literally everything would transform, and it almost transformed into a classical piece. And so that's how it started, and that began my journey into this other brand new world that was just being discovered, and it did because once I from there I ended up going to a couple other restaurants, and these restaurants really did change the entire direction of cooking. You ask any chef in the world, and they'll tell you the same thing. So it was inspiration, and I'm glad that my grandfather suggested that I do that because yes, I could have taken the other route and could have been just a classic pastry chef. But the interesting thing is this movement obviously went into the pastry world as well. So I didn't really feel like I missed out in that sense.
I think you made the right decision, but it's also kind of crazy because as a 16-year-old, you might be thinking, oh, this is like the best pastry chef in the world. The ego could be, flying high. And then your grandfather, who you've got huge respect for, just says, that is a great opportunity, but this could be better for you. Like to listen to that is still pretty rare because, often we chase things potentially for the wrong reasons, especially when we're younger, but you listened to that and you did that. So I think that's quite remarkable as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I looked up to him a lot. So for me, it was a no brainer to just be like, okay, well, he obviously has his best interest in me, so it's I've got to listen to him.
True.
Yeah, but it was amazing.
Then, when you do this experience, so I forget the guy's name, but it obviously sounds like he was connected to the highest realms, the highest dimensions, to be able to hear the sympathy. Fuck, I said that wrong. But anyway, to be able to hear that and to experience that, and then you've been a part of other things as well. How did that change your life? Because you said not only the colors, but just what you're able to create. Did that just change your worldview like that?
It did. You know what? Honestly, it made me more vulnerable.
Ooh.
Um, we're talking about a world that's very chaotic, right? I'm sure you've heard stories from other chefs. It's chaos, it's aggression,
Yeah.
there's a lot of ego. It's not far from the truth. I mean, look, I've experienced, I've had my experiences in certain kitchens. The level of ego and intensity and abuse, all of it, right? And I was quite used to, especially being a young apprentice, you're used to getting yelled at. You're used to, I mean, hell, I've had things thrown at me. I
Jeez.
mean, it's, pots, hot sauces, everything you
Oh,
can
and they can burn
imagine.
you and wow.
Yeah. Obviously, that's changed now. Everything is changing now. It's not as bad as it was, but it's always been, and it's also, it was always, or has been a male dominated industry, and so the testosterone levels were through the roof. So you can imagine, which is why it was a breath of fresh air when I started ARZAK, because Elena, the daughter of Juan Maria ARZAK, she was basically the one that kind of just took me under her wing. So I really learned a lot from her. Um, but I did. I became, what I learned from it. What I realized is that I did become more vulnerable because of the fact that everything was so. It needed. Cooking always requires patience and care. Now, when you're in an environment like that, where it's always about being the best and doing the best and being consistent in being the best, you kind of lose sight of the nurture aspect of it all,
Mm.
right? Um, which is what cooking is, why we started cooking in the first place, to not only just to feed ourselves and survive, but to nurture, to take care of others. And I think that throughout the years, as the whole idea of the restaurant developed, we kind of lost track of that. And
Do you mean
so
in the
when
sense of like just restaurants in general, they're there to churn out food and we've lost, that love and care that, put in, and the reason that, you do it is to uplift and create something beautiful for others?
Yes, I mean, look, the way the whole restaurant started off, it started in France years and years and years ago, as this idea of a person cooking publicly for people, and to give them a sense of the place that they were in, to be able to taste the beautiful, produce that surrounded them. You had these chefs that would, take the time to get everything locally and present this food, and ultimately get it to a point where you're sharing this with complete strangers in a room where you had multiple people experiencing this beautiful experience, and also being nurtured at the same time. It started like that, and then as it got more popular and popular throughout history, of course, then it became competitive, because then you had, well, this chef here is doing this, and then that chef is doing that, and then it just became, sort of like the Olympics. Like everyone, oh, well, no, we have better meat here, or we have better this here, and it kind of just evolved that way, and it became very structured. Whereas it just used to be someone cooking in their home, and then would invite people in and set up tables in their home, and you're here. I'm going to feed you this, and it's going to be a feast, and we're all going to enjoy, drink, laugh. That's what it was about. And then it just turned very, it became very structured, and it became more of this profession that people were striving to be the best at all costs. And I think we lost a lot of sight of that.
Yep.
Look, there's still a lot of people that do it for the right reasons. Of course, restaurants need to make money,
Yeah.
but it's a catch-22 profession, because you want to do the best food all the time, and you want to give everyone the most beautiful experience, but you've got to limit yourself to what you can buy and how much you can sell it for. There's all these factors involved, right? That can kind of diminish that experience at times. But if you're very simple and you keep it simple, but you win both ways.
Yep.
But it was with this new era kind of coming out. There's all these things that were very delicate, and they required your attention, and they required your softness again, because you were delving into something that you'd never seen before. Forget all the books and all the schools you ever went to. None of this was written.
Wow.
So here you are trying to figure things out, and you kind of have to be sort of like a child and kind of be, the curiosity is the best thing you can have in a situation like that. You look at it, you absorb it, you feel it, and so that's what I got from it. I found that I became a lot more sensitive, a lot more vulnerable. I paid more attention to not only what I was looking at, but what I was feeling. That's how it all evolved.
That's amazing. That's so rare. Then, as you said before, a lot of it's like a male-dominated sport, or especially at that time. And now that you've learned vulnerability and sensitivity, how did you cope in the different types of kitchens? I know you went to Japan, you've been in America, and also Australia. Was that hard for a sensitive soul to deal with that?
Um, it was always different in every country that I was in. God, obviously Japan, that's another level altogether.
Yeah.
I think Japan is honestly, I think it's its own planet. I think it should be its own planet because
Yep.
the people that are they're just the most incredible people. The culture is beautiful. It's rich. The amount of we look at them and we think, my God, these people are perfect. Everything they do is perfect. And look, it's not. It is. It's the truth. When I first went there, I was mesmerized by how slow and how beautiful every movement, how thoughtful every movement was, um, and learning another cuisine was just so. I mean, learning that cuisine, I should say, was so mesmerizing because it was so poetic. And talk about vulnerability. Here I was. I've been learning all these incredible new methods, but then I kind of take a few steps back into nature again, in a sense, because I started learning some of the first Japanese cuisine in Kyoto, which is it's all about nature and balance.
Mhm.
So that was incredible. That was also very nurturing in a different way. But then you start talking about all these other beautiful things, like just the natural aspect of it all, and the respect that they had for the product, for everything, for the tradition, for the craft. It was mesmerizing to see that. And then there's times where I've worked, I've gone to France or you know other parts of Spain or the States or Australia, and it does change. Everything's got its every single place has taught me some amazing things.
Yeah.
But it's very different. I think that I think it depends on who you're with. It doesn't really matter what part of the world you're in. It's who you're doing it with, and if you can connect with these people. And a lot
True.
of the people that do this craft, you have to do this craft out of love. It's definitely a labor of love. Takes a long time to make good money at it and be successful. So you really got to love it.
True.
Yeah, but it's definitely been different depending on where I was in the world, or even Mexico for that matter. But I'm just always fascinated by different cultures, how they cook. I've got extreme curiosity. So whenever
I
I
was
go
just
to
about
a
to say,
different
yeah.
part of the world and I see something, it's just, my God, it's almost as if I become a kid again. I become vulnerable again, and it's wow. It reminds me how beautiful this craft is. You
That
know,
I think you would know better than everyone. I know you've met with the masters and you've had an incredible journey, but I'm sure that it's a very small percent of people in this industry that are like you. Because as you said, there's a lot of things that can impact, kind of the art form as well, and whether it's money, time, difficult people, just life stresses. But for you to be able to follow your curiosity is like quite profound because that's obviously, follow through in your life as well. I think that's remarkable. I want to just tie up the last bit about Spain because you've gone to so many places and you've done so many amazing things. With the molecular gastronomy guy, what was he like as a person? Was he like this wizard? Was he on another, like, was he elevated? Like literally, yeah.
You know what? So ARZAK, the guy you're talking about is Juan Mari ARZAK. When you look at him, he looked like someone's grandfather. He reminded me a lot of my grandfather. There was a beautiful softness to him, and he was. I mean, well, back when I was an apprentice with him, he would have been in his 50s because he's in his 80s now. Yeah. But it was, you would speak to him and it was like he was as excited as a child, right? He was so excited to discover something new, and more importantly, to share that with his daughter or his team. And to me, that was something to really admire. You know, because again, you're in this world where a lot of chefs want to be the best. Some only care about the accolades, some don't. They want to be noticed. They want to be seen. They will do whatever they need to do to get to that level, right? And those types of people, they tend to lose sight of their team, or they just have somebody else deal with their team. I always flourished with cooking with chefs that were the captains of their ship, but they still took the time to talk to their people personally.
That's a good leader.
And I think that's a very special thing to be able to do, to really be at the same level as everyone. I mean, I remember him telling me you're only as good as your weakest team member. You know, and it was interesting that he said that, because he basically meant we're all equal. You know, so if someone's low, if someone's not, getting to the point of something that where we need it to be at, or someone's kind of distressed and needs help, well, we all need to go to that level and help him, because we're only as good as that person. And I respected that. And it also makes you want to pay more attention. Loyalty becomes easy at that point.
That can be quite rare in all industries, but especially as you said, people are chasing different things, get a inverted commas a better opportunity, and just leave. I love that. That's a great leader. That's like a masterful leader.
They're rare.
You don't see too many of that. So how long do you end up doing this internship, and then do you go to Japan right after that? What's the timeline?
So I did that for almost 3 years. Because after a year, I wasn't an apprentice anymore. I just started working within the restaurant and doing all the different sections.
And on that, was it unpaid for the first year as well?
Yeah.
Oh wow! So that shows real dedication. Everyone wants to be there. Yeah.
Typically, I mean, look, I'm sure it's changed now. And I think now apprentices do make some money, just enough to put in their pocket. Back then, they didn't.
Yeah, that's crazy.
But luckily, I had my family close by, so they were helping me. It was basically my college, I guess you can say, really.
Yeah.
But from there, I ended up going. I did end up going to Japan, and the thing is, how I even ended up in Japan was another apprentice that was in the restaurant was from Japan, and we became great friends. And he would talk to me about his family's restaurant in Kyoto, and he would show me photographs. And before that, I had already read a lot about the culture. I was actually quite fascinated with the culture. I was always big on history, so I loved the whole history of the samurai, and I was just fascinated by that. And I was curious about the food. And then when he started showing me all these photographs of what his family was doing, and how long that restaurant had been, it was generations. We're talking about a 200-plus-year-old restaurant.
Whoa,
It sat maybe 30 people, but it had been open for generations, and that just sparked this curiosity, like, wow, how do I get there? And we're talking about the 90s here, so it's not. Back then, it was unusual for a Westerner to go and learn these methods in Japan, or for any country for that matter. Especially Japan. They've always been very, or at least they were very cautious about sharing their traditions, right? Which is why it's always been so difficult to, go through the ranks within the culture itself. That's why it takes a sushi master 10 years just to learn how to make perfect rice.
Yep.
So it was difficult, which meant that, when I did get the opportunity, when he asked me to come visit, and I said to him, can I work with you? He didn't say no, but when I did get, when I did get there, I basically, I was allowed to just hang out. I was allowed to watch. I still had to be respectful. I had to wear certain things. I remember I had to shave my head. Everyone there was like a monk.
Wow.
So I shaved my head. Well, not that I had a lot of facial hair back then, but I was presentable. I had my own sort of kimono. Everything was respectful, and I was invited to go, and it was a long day. We're talking from like 5, 6 a.m. till nighttime. So I was doing some serious hours.
Yeah.
But they were hours of just watching. And of course they would feed me. It was a very, everyone would always eat together. They would take pride in that as well. They would make a beautiful meal. Everything was so beautifully done and perfect. And we would eat together, and I sat down and ate with them. It was beautiful. But I would watch for hours and hours, and I was so mesmerized by the detail of everything, from cutting fish, to how they washed fish, how they cleaned fish, how they cut certain vegetables, how they treated certain vegetables, and everything was done so quiet. Again, it was like a symphony, of the most beautifully fine-tuned instruments.
Yeah.
And no sound. It was like everyone. It felt like everyone was meditating, And
Wow.
so I watched, and it got to the point where I did. Sorry, there's a little dog yapping. I don't know why.
No.
It got to the point where I believe it was after 3 months. And look, you would think, wow, that's crazy. Who would want to do that? Just stand around and watch. But the thing is, I was just so enamored by it all that I was excited. And I was always anticipating, hopefully getting a job, whether it was washing a carrot or whatever it was. I was hoping to get something, right? So I kind of just stood there on the sidelines, like a football player ready to go in.
I'm up, coach. I'm ready. Put
me in, coach. Put me in. But I remember vividly the uncle, I guess he was the head chef, finally, kind of, without saying any words, because he didn't speak Spanish. I didn't speak Japanese.
And did you speak English at the time?
Yeah. I spoke English, and so did the guy my friend that I met, but he actually spoke some Spanish as well.
Okay.
I remember the uncle kind of just calling me over, and he had this intensity, right? I mean, he almost felt like a samurai. He was just, he very stoic and very, intense face, but there was a softness and a gentleness to him. So I wasn't intimidated at all. I was actually kind of, I was kind of, smitten by the fact that he called me. And so I come, and he kind of shows me, he shows me his knives, right? And I'm looking at his knives. And he asked me to just watch him, and so what I ended up doing is I ended up watching him sharpening his knife for like an hour.
Wow.
And it was like watching a samurai sharpen his own katana. I mean, and there was a purpose for that. He said, the only way this was the story that I got later. Basically, the only way you're ever going to be able to touch food is if your tools are where they need to be. And you need to respect your tools. There's a process before the process.
Yep.
You need to be almost like ready for battle. Even though you may not ever go into battle, you should always be prepared for it, right?
Yep.
And So he would, and every chef did their own knives, right? And he would sharpen these beautiful knives, and they look brand new, like they had never been used before, but they were just beautiful. Even the way he kept them in front of him, with a little piece of timber where they would the blade would stand up, so it would you would have the handle and the blade would be up, ready to be used. There was a process for everything. So, essentially what he ended up doing was he ended up giving me some old knife that he hadn't used in God knows how long, maybe when he was an apprentice. And he allowed me to use that specific knife. But before I used it, I had to learn how to sharpen the knives. So by that point, the fact that I had gotten that job alone, I was excited. Mm-hmm. And that's how it started. Little jobs like that. The ultimate, which is one of the craziest things, I had no idea how to use chopsticks.
Oh, yeah.
So, so this is the crazy. Now, at this point, I thought, wow, I must really want to be here because this is just absolutely insane. I had no idea how to use chopsticks. So what he did one day was, he kind of showed me how he did it. And then he brought two bowls. One bowl was full of rice. The other bowl it was completely empty. So what he did was with his chopsticks, got a grain of rice, put it back into the bowl. And he did that. He got 1 grain of rice, just dropped it into the bowl. Hands me the chopsticks and says, you need to learn how to use chopsticks. Once you've learned how to sharpen your knives, you need to know how to use chopsticks.
Wow. It's like wax on, wax off at the karate. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I kind of felt like, Daniel LaRusso at that point. Yeah. But so I started to do that, and I thought, this is insane. And look, and that started to test my patience and everything about myself. But here I am trying to, at one point I would try to use both my hands, and he would, kind of say no, or even slap my hand one time. And then, so I had to learn how to put a kernel into the empty bowl. It must have taken me, God, I don't know how long. It would have taken me probably a good 6 weeks to complete it because I didn't do it all day. But
I thought you were going to say like 6 hours. Oh my God!
It was crazy. It was crazy. But the funny thing was, that as soon as I finished and I had finally gotten that last kernel in, Funny looks at me and goes, "All right, well now you got to put them back into the other bowl." So wow, okay, this is if I'm not a chopstick master at the end of this, I don't know what to think. But every single thing had a purpose. Every single thing had a purpose, and that's how it evolved. And then ultimately, what happens with that culture for me was you have to prove how loyal you are to yourself first before you are loyal to somebody else. And that's what it taught me. And then that's when then things slowly moved. Then once I did chopsticks, then I started to learn how to wash things properly, wash fish properly, dry them properly, then fill it. It was all a process. So that was my journey into Japan, which ultimately ended up really coming together beautifully with everything else that I had learned. And it's still with me today.
It's amazing. You answered like my next 20 questions. What a beautiful blend between the two cultures, applying that, learning from like masters as well. Also, you got your screenplay, just the Japan leg of your story. That is, I can't believe it took 6 weeks and then he made you do it again. How long did you say you were in Japan all up for?
I was off and on 3 years, because I kept going in and then coming back out. I need to get back. I need to get back. Yeah. So I did everything that I could. The first 2 years mostly in Kyoto, and then I spent a year traveling through Tokyo because I wanted to learn that other side of the Japanese because it's so different, By that point, I had already worked at some pretty amazing restaurants that Japan really knew about, so it got me through the door a lot easier when I got to Tokyo. Yeah. But it was but 3 years all up.
And did you ever become fluent in Japanese? How did you?
Kitchen Japanese.
Say that again?
I was kitchen Japanese.
Kitchen Japanese, yeah.
Yeah. So it was, look, I know some words, obviously. Because I was, all I did was work. It's not like I was going to Japan and hanging out with people outside of the restaurant.
Mm.
You know, I did do that a few times, but for the most part, I was actually really just wanting to just learn everything I possibly could about the cuisine, you know, and also the culture. I mean, at that point, you know, it's one of those moments where you kind of feel like, did I live here in another lifetime? Because
Yeah.
it felt so natural to me. It
You
really
don't
did.
you don't understand, and I'm sure everyone's thinking this as well, like how unique your outlook is, you know, just to do those type of hours, to just want to learn and grow. The rice, that
Yeah.
that was a test, but also to build
Oh,
resilience in your mind. Like
yeah.
that's something you can go back to for the rest of your life. Like
Well,
that.
that was a real tester. That was a real tester for me. It's like, okay, how, and that's why I thought it was really beautiful when he said, like, look, the first person you need to be loyal to is yourself, and you know, and that's what he was trying to teach me, you
Because
know, which is it. It's great.
it's teaching you what's the quote? It's better to be a warrior in a garden than a gardener in a war. I forget. I butchered that so badly,
Yeah,
but
yeah, yeah. I know.
but it's teaching you that resilience, but also like, oh, that would have done so much just for yourself. I love how like they apply the self into that as well. It's like it's a pure art form. And as you said, you know, tying everything back, not a lot of people necessarily do that, but them building you up along with the craft, that is a beautiful outlook. I'm glad that you had that as well.
Yeah, I was very fortunate to be able to experience that, and yeah, look, it really did teach me a lot about myself.
I'm glad that you had that, and we can see where the intuition, all that stuff comes in.
Uh,
Now I want to build to the America leg because
mm,
okay, we're probably going to need 400 hours. Don't worry, I won't do that to you. But you go to America, and this is already a crazy story. I believe someone asked you if you could help set up a restaurant in San Francisco, and then you're working on that, and then the restaurant doesn't go to head. You end up
mm.
living in your car for 2 years, I think. Can you tell me what was going on at that time? Because this
Uh,
blows my mind.
Man, yeah. You know, my whole idea was to go to the U.S., work at some of the best restaurants in the U.S. I always had a list of restaurants on a board that I knew I wanted to work at or at least be an apprentice at. I was on a mission to get to these specific restaurants, and they were all over the world. And I definitely had a list that was based in the U.S. So I went to New York first, and I started doing a bit of work there with some really incredible chefs. Um, and I thought I would have stayed in New York because I did love that city. Um, but it was definitely intense. It was an intense city to live in.
Yep, definitely.
But learned some incredible things. Met some incredible people, extremely talented chefs and creatives there. Um, and then while I was getting ready to embark on this new journey at a French restaurant there, it was a Jean Georges restaurant. It was his original restaurant that he opened in New York City, which is Jean Georges was one of the first real kind of French chefs to tie together Asian and French. You know, he was doing a really beautiful job back then.
Okay.
So I really loved what he was doing, and I was getting ready to kind of, you know, go on that journey when I just got a phone call from a friend of mine who I'd met during, you know, another apprenticeship, and he was American, and he said, "Look, I I'm opening my first restaurant in San Francisco, and I really need some help. And we've worked together, and I would love to, because he knew I was in New York, and I would love to get your help to help me with this, and I can pay you." And you know, at the time, I was making pennies, but I kind of said, you know what? Why not? Let's go to California. Let's go west, and this, I don't know, something could come from this. Who knows? So I pack up my things, which is, you know, one suitcase. Um, you know, I was able to buy myself a ticket. I fly there, and you know, by that point, I didn't have much in my pocket, so I was sleeping, you know, at his house. It was a place just outside of San Francisco. It was called Half Moon Bay, which is this beautiful place. A lot of surfers would know this spot
Yeah.
actually. Um, And his idea was to do kind of Pan Asian cuisine. I knew a lot of Japanese food already, or a lot of technique. So we kind of started to create this menu. Long story short, his investors end up kind of being very greedy. They pulled the plug. We had hired all the staff. We had all this stuff ready to
Oh,
go, and then the whole thing just falls apart. And then I thought, well, and he was going to move back to LA. He was poor guy was about to get a divorce, so I was like, all right, well, I mean, I don't know what to do. It's either, I've only got a little bit of time left. It's probably go back to Spain or New York. I don't know if I can go back to New York because it was expensive. So I might go back to Spain. But if this is the last time I'm gonna be here in the U.S. for a bit, I'll just go to California and just to hang out for a bit. So I go there with him, and then I wasn't able to really stay at his place. He ended up moving somewhere that was way too far from the areas that I wanted to be in. So I thought, well, maybe I can make some quick money while I'm here. So I tried to get into certain restaurants. I really didn't know the California food scene at that time. It was also a time in LA where, I mean, don't get me wrong, California's got incredible cuisine. But at the time, it wasn't really known for its fine dining.
yeah.
So I wasn't really sure where I wanted to do it, and I certainly wasn't going to open anything of my own because I had no idea how to. So I started doing just odd jobs here and there. I did, I ended up helping someone who had a little catering company. I started doing here, bits and pieces there, but I was running out of money. It wasn't paying very well, and it wasn't very consistent. So I ended up the car. I had this car that actually, bought secondhand from somebody in San Francisco, and it was a Honda Civic or something like that. I ended up selling it and got a little bit of cash for it. It wasn't in the best condition. Sold it, got some cash from it, and then I realized that I couldn't keep up with it. I couldn't well, what am I going to do? I can't really afford an apartment, and I had tried to live, I didn't really know anybody, so I couldn't really have roommates. So what I ended up doing was I ended up buying another car with what I had. I said, you know what, this is going to be really crazy, but I'm just going to buy something that's just going to be big enough that I could fit in, and then that way I don't have to worry about rent. I can if I need to go to take showers, I can go to certain people's homes, or I can go to a gym, whatever I can do.
Yep.
And I thought, and then I could just get some momentum going with these caterings, and maybe I'll find a restaurant that I really want to work at. And I kind of just went through that for almost 2 years, a year and a half. But then it got to the point, talk about hitting rock bottom. You start to feel kind of really down on yourself, or at least I did. And but it wasn't. I know it sounds like when I say this to people and they think, "Wow, you lived in your car for almost 2 years." Well, yeah, but you don't understand. I was young and I was hungry, so I was willing to do whatever I had to do.
Yeah.
It wasn't always easy and comfortable, but I was on a mission. So finally, it got to the point where I was literally running out of money. I'm like, what am I going to do? I can't do anything. And then finally, I got my parents to get me a flight back. As soon as that happened, I think maybe a week after that, I was getting ready to leave back to Spain for in a week. I run into this Italian chef,
Yeah.
who I'd met a while back. Great guy, great chef. He was super excited. We met, we saw each other at some little bar. And then he started chatting to me because we hadn't seen each other in so long. And then he finally said to me, look, I stopped working in restaurants. I'm like, what do you mean? I was like, well, yeah, are you doing catering? I'm like, no. I'm just working for an actor in Hollywood. I'm like, really? Doing what? What are you doing? It's just, it's really amazing. It's just because you get to be on set and you just do this. You just basically feed the actor or actors and you get paid really well. I'm like, oh, okay, that's kind of cool. I didn't really think anything of it. I didn't say, oh, is there something for me? I didn't know. I thought, oh, that's cool, I guess. I did love film, but I didn't think, well, what am I going to do in films? What in a film studio?
Yeah.
So, anyways, our conversation ended. We ended up having a good night. We drank quite a few beers, got drunk. A couple days later, get a phone call from him saying that he needed to go back to Italy because I believe it was his mother or grandmother was very ill. So he asked me to do a favor for him, and he asked me if I could fill in for him. I said, well, what am I going to do? What do you want me to do? Like, look, it's really easy and it pays really well. And then he told me how much it paid. And I said, you know what? Well, if they want me to just reheat microwave dinners, I'll do that. I don't care. So I said, the hell with it. Let's do this. So I ended up doing it, and I ended up going to the studio. And for the first couple of days, I was just kind of cooking in my own little studio cabin, little thing. And I hadn't seen an actor. I was just preparing the food. And then finally, I get to the point where in comes this guy. And I recognize him, like, holy shit, it's Tom Cruise.
Wow.
And I thought, is he doing a film here? And then I thought, well, no, that's the guy whose diet you're looking after at the moment. I thought, are you kidding me?
Wow.
By that point, I was just like, wait a minute, this is just surreal. Like, hold on. He was a lot younger at the time. I believe he was doing, was it Vanilla Sky? I believe it was Sky. Or maybe something before that. I don't know. But anyway, comes in, beautiful human being, just comes in, kind of just glows, has this incredible presence, shook my hand, looks you in the eye when he shakes your hand, very professional, very matter-of-factly, and I was like, wow, okay. So and I ended up having this really incredible conversation, and feeding him and a couple of people in his little team. And it was actually a really fun thing. It was completely different than what I had been doing. It's not like I was doing some crazy things with him. It was very basic, but he was a lover of fine food. And that what was meant to be just a few weeks replacement ended up turning into 3 months and the rest of what he was shooting. So finally, we kind of, the whole thing ends. He thanks me, and he goes, well, look, I'd love to be able to, use you again. And at that point, I was like, I don't know if I really want to do this. I didn't say that to him, but I was like, look, this is great. I got some good money, but I really want to go back and start going into restaurants again. But he was really so incredibly generous. And he said, well, look, whatever you decide to do, if you don't mind, I'll consider you. I'll tell people about you if they ever need someone and you're around, you need some
That's
extra
nice.
cash. So that's how, I think I ended up having a nice chunk of change in my pocket. I got myself sorted. I ended up getting an apartment because I thought to myself, you know what? What if I can kind of take this to my advantage and make some quick cash and then go back to Europe and work on my craft? Then I have best of both worlds, because the restaurants don't really pay it great. And if I go during the high season of the restaurants, then I get the creativity, and then I go back and I make money. Boom. And I thought, let's do this. A couple weeks later, I ended up getting a phone call from a guy who was a stunt coordinator who wanted some help for some diets, some specific food for his team who are working on a film. And it all kind of snowballed from there, and it just became this huge thing where people were contacting me.
Crazy, yeah.
And I guess because of the fact that my food has always been, forget the complexity or the technicality, my food always is, well, first of all, I do believe I love Mediterranean cuisine, obviously. And then you add the element of the Japanese, which is very clean, very simple, very pure. My food always felt, there's always a sense of just lightness to what I do. And I think, and then because of the fact that I loved it so much, I infused that into the cuisine, and I think people felt good from it. That's what I felt. I think they felt that they were being nurtured and taken care of, and it was done in a really professional way.
And you put that in the food, people can feel it. I don't know if you have words on this. You can tell when a food, I don't eat Macca's, but when something's just churned out and it's you can feel it. I don't know, do you have words to that? There's something when someone puts love into food, you can feel it's elevated.
Oh, absolutely. I definitely think food is energetic. If you're in a bad mood or if you're upset, that goes into the food, and you can get people sick. I honestly believe that.
Um,
Um, and I was very respectful to what I did and how I did it and who I did it for. Because to me, I didn't care if you were a billionaire or a person on the streets. You deserve the same kind of cuisine or food and nourishment.
yeah.
So it just became this thing, and I started getting all these clients, and
Cool.
it got to the point where I thought, you know what, I'm getting a lot of people asking me to help them with their diet, and then when I mean diet, it wasn't just the food that I was cooking. The food was obviously there, but I thought, you know what, it makes sense for a chef or a cook to also have the nutritional aspect on their on their CV or as knowledge, right?
Yeah.
You should know the chemistry of all that. I think it should be part of the training. I think a lot of culinary schools are very antiquated. They just focus on the traditional stuff and the basics, which is nothing wrong with that. But I really do honestly believe that there should be a new level of cookery schools that incorporate all that. So I thought to myself, you know what? Yeah.
No, you're going. You're going.
I thought, you know what? I'm going to get certified in nutrition and add it on there. So I got really interested because again, science was always something that I really enjoyed as well. I guess the kind of the chemistry of it all. So I got really interested in nutritional science and nutritional biochemistry because I was a bit of a nerd and I kind of liked the idea of, what is it when you eat this or this and this level, what does it do to your body? And it's a whole holistic approach really is what I was trying to do, right? Because you are what you eat. You really are.
Agreed.
So I did that, and that added another layer of like, okay, this guy isn't just a cook, a chef. He actually knows what he's talking about, and why it does that. So that's how I started doing that, and I somehow was able to achieve exactly what I told you was, all right, I'm going to make my money doing this, but then I'm going to go fulfill my craft here, and that lasted pretty much up until this point, So I've continued to do that.
Okay, I've got a million questions. Yeah. It's awesome by you to be able to, add that element. You probably knew the nutrition side, but also just getting that piece of paper also for further proof for other people. That's very forward moving. Okay, I love this. You're speaking my language, and there's so many little points I'm just going to speak out loud, but I've got a few questions. You are what you eat. It's we could speak about that for 10 hours. I don't know if you know a guy named Paul Chek. He talks about literally you are. So okay. We'll talk about that later. You are literally what you eat, and that comes down to the soil, the mindset, how you see the food, the ingredients, so important. But also, I want to go back to potentially, depending on how you see the world, you are about to go to Spain. You're about to go back. LA, America wasn't working for you in that sense. The hardships being in a car, you buy that ticket, and then, this opportunity kind of unravels. You work within the private chef space, opens your mind to a new way of potentially cooking. Then you meet Chris Hemsworth. That opens up. We'll talk about where that leads you. What do you think? Like, do you believe in destiny or fate or the universe working for you? How do you see it? Or are you just following your intuition and, saying yes?
I think, I don't know that I believe in fate, but I do believe that each of us does have a very specific purpose that's within us, right? And it takes us however amount of time to discover that. And to me, that's just being who you are. Every single person is born, unique. And part of the journey is really understanding who that person is and allowing that person to be, and I think that everything that I've achieved and that I've been very grateful for achieving and people that I've met, I wanted that, I whether it's consciously or subconsciously, I worked for it, emotionally, physically. I prepared myself, preparation, it was something that I wanted. It's like a spiritual growth. You always have this.
Definitely.
When people want to discover things about themselves, or they do anything they can to get to that level. And I think that a lot of people focus on being happy, happy, happy. When I think the most important thing really is to be at peace. And I think that because happiness is going to go up and down, right?
So,
And you're always there's going to be points of disappointment. There's going to be, maybe you didn't like this thing or that, process. But for me, feeling at peace is a lot more important than happiness. Look, happiness is a plus; it's a cherry on top. But being at peace, I think, is the most important thing. And for me to have achieved that, and which is a daily thing for me, is to just trust myself, and I think that once you really learn to listen and as look at it as it's it's kind of I don't want to sound cheesy, but look, it really is about following your heart and your intuition.
I agree.
It really is.
Yep.
And it's essentially just really respecting yourself. It's like, again, it's like how the best way to be loyal to yourself is to appreciate yourself, and you move through life like that. Look, I'm not saying it's easy. I certainly didn't go through it. Everything wasn't easy for me, but I knew how I wanted to feel, and I wanted to, and that was the goal. And when you want to feel a certain way, there's always going to be two sides of that spectrum, and then you're in the middle.
Yep.
Sometimes. Yeah. But
okay.
Yeah, I think that's a big one for me. It really is.
Okay. I still want to continue with the America to Australia, but it sounds like you got a daily practice, so you're a meditator, you journal, you write, you obviously do exercise and eat well.
I do meditate every day. Look, sometimes it's not full meditation. Sometimes it's just, allowing my brain to shut down and just be, not think, right? Because I think most creatives, a lot of people will always be in their head. Yep. I certainly am. So I think my main goal in the morning when I wake up is to just be mindful, really. And if it ends up going to a deep meditative state, then great. Stay away from my phone until at least 2 hours into the day when I wake up.
Whoa! Okay.
Yeah. Yep. Which is a big one. It's a really big one. Look, journaling, I wouldn't say journal. Interestingly enough, I was just going through a bunch of boxes that my parents brought me from Spain, and I ended up opening them up, and I saw tons and tons of journals, books. Let me call them notebooks, where I kind of call them my everything book, where if I have a thought, I'll write that thought. If I have an idea for a dish, I write the idea for the dish or the recipe, or I draw something, or if I feel like painting this. So it's this collage of feelings, emotions, ideas, all of it, and or even dish ideas. There's some pages in there that have very colorful ideas of a dish that I was testing out. Labeled everything. Oh, it's going to have this. It's going to have that. It's going to have this piece on top of that's going to look like glass, but it's actually going to be made out of clear ice, and all these things, or even musical notes. Like, oh, I want to try that.
Oh, that's amazing.
So yeah. I would say it's more of a kind of a, I don't know. I guess if you want to call it a journal, I guess it's a journal.
Yeah.
But it's just got everything in there. So I do that, and it's something that I have around. I don't necessarily write in it every single day, but I know it's available.
Okay. Yeah. And have you been doing this your whole life, or did you discover it?
All my life since I was a kid. I found some from when I was 5 or 6 of just little drawings. Or I used to make my own toys. just to make my own masks or whatever. So it's I've always had that.
You are a highly elevated soul. You're an old soul. That's awesome to hear. And now, going from America, you do that. You work with some crazy names. You meet Chris Hemsworth, and he offers you a job in Australia. Can you tell me what happens there? Because that's quite the move. That can be quite
Huge.
scary.
Yeah, huge move. Because originally it was only meant to be a 3-month thing. Because he was getting ready to do the next Avengers. It was a big thing for him. He was already comfortable because I had helped him quite a bit in LA when he was living in LA with his wife also, and that because that's how it all actually started. Um, Elsa and I knew a lot of the same people in Hollywood from Spain, and that's how we kind of connected. She found me in the States, and then we realized we knew a lot of the same people, and she was the one that asked to help Chris, and I said sure,
Oh, nice.
absolutely, and we became great friends. They're the loveliest people on the planet, and so I was with him in London, and he was finishing the Avengers film, and then he was getting ready to do another one, and he basically said, look, there's going to be a series of these things, and I would love to keep you on board.
Yep.
I thought, well, look, sure, I'll help you, but I really want to do some other projects. No problem. Come at least to Australia with me for a few months. This is when he was doing the third Thor, third Thor. And so I came here, I helped. He was filming in the Gold Coast, actually.
Oh,
And
nice.
yeah, and then I got here. I'd never been to Byron before. I had visited Australia years ago, but briefly. I think I'd been in Sydney for like maybe 3 days, 4 days. I had never heard of Byron Bay. Come here, I just completely fall in love with the place because how can you not?
Yep.
I thought, wow, okay, maybe I can live here for a while. Maybe I need a bit of a change of scenery from like the fast life in London, LA, New York, Barcelona. Maybe it's time to wind down a little bit and see what happens here. So I decided to do that, and then stayed with him for a bit. We go through the process, and I thought, you know what, let's just do it. So I ended up staying with him for quite a while. What should have been 3 months ended up being years and years.
Wow. And when you say staying with him, were you literally in the house, or did you have your own place?
No, I was mostly helping him externally on his projects, and also when he was not on film, he would still be training. I would work closely with his trainer. He's always been. He's very serious about his health and his physique, and he's always been really good about that. He's it's like being with an athlete. He's really amazing with that, and the discipline that he's got is quite amazing. And the same goes for his wife, Elsa, who's she's a weapon. I mean, they're very good about all that. So there was always a lot to be done because the guy was always working on something. So was she. So it made sense for me to kind of stick with them until I found my next chapter of whatever I was going to do, which I did have quite a few things already in the works. And then when I finally decided to kind of break away, that's when COVID happened.
I heard
this ruined it for everybody.
Yeah. I heard at this stage, you're doing great stuff with Chris and the fam, and then you were looking for inspiration and you were potentially considering a leave. I only heard you say it as a sentence. So I might be, diving too deep into it. And then COVID happened. So how did that kind of change what you were looking for or your path?
Well, there was 2 things that were going to happen as soon as I made that decision to leave. One was I was going to open a restaurant with one of my mentors in Spain, who continues to be a mentor for me, who's part of that whole molecular gastronomy movement. His name is Albert Adria, he's a genius. I was going to do that with him, and second, I noticed that there was a need for this kind of whole new era of a chef, right? We've always seen chefs as people who are very intense, who are alcoholics, drug addicts, have serious trauma, have all these complexities, and it's always about winning. When in fact, and I think this definitely changed post-COVID, I think has changed a lot. A lot of chefs now have quit drinking, have quit smoking, have quit doing everything, have stopped partying. Because look, chefs have been notorious for being big partiers and
Yep.
whatnot. But I think that now you're seeing even a lot of high end restaurants and fine dining restaurants throughout the world building gyms within their structure so they can give that to their staff. Because with the long hours and all that's involved in hospitality, you really need to make sure that your health, physical and mental health, is good and clean and sharp. So I think that the second thing that I was really wanting to do is I was trying to figure out how to build this kind of new school sort of thing where you would get chefs who were already trained in the traditional methods, but to evolve them into the new era of what it is to be a chef. Because your job is to feed people. It's yes, a part of it is entertainment, but a huge part of it is the nourishment. And which is why I was going to incorporate, a lot, the nutritional science aspect of it, training and meditations, teaching different elements of cooking and agriculture, botany, you name it. Just you essentially a whole holistic chef, the new chef of 2025, And I had this idea to build this sort of kind of training institution where we would have that, because then you can kind of get a chef, whether they're trained in fine dining or in private work, and to be able to do either one single-handedly, you benefit from really doing both, experiencing both worlds, because it really does help you. So I was, because I've had a lot of people here in Australia call me and asked me if I can find them a chef, and I said sure, but it is quite limited here as far as that goes, because here in Australia, any great chef in Australia, they go to Europe to train, And I thought, well, why is that? I mean, Australia's got incredible produce. We've got incredible farms. We've got incredible talent. Why don't we have something here that's accessible where we can help them be better chefs and really become this completely other thing, So that was the biggest thing that I was working on. And it kind of just, it got put to the side. Not to say that it's not going to happen, but those were the two main things that I was going to do. I was focusing on.
I love that, because I was thinking at one stage before I got in, even kind of while I was doing this, was creating a holistic center where, the physio speaks to the PT and the PT speaks to the osteo, the kinesiologist or whatever. And everyone has dialogue where, yes, you might see like the doctor, but how can we work with the doctor? Because I don't know if you know, like a doctor model's like 7 minutes or less in Australia. And it's like, how can you give health advice when by the time you said, hi, how are you? It's already, your appointment's over. But you also said with the new chef, and also, there's so many points. I'll be quick. But with like Paul Chek, for example, and I follow a lot of people, he's saying that just eating well is not enough. You need to do a combination of everything: the breathing, the mindfulness, the meditation, the exercise, the movement, the positive thoughts, and then that's how they all rapidly improve. And you've said before, the new chef, the craft isn't enough anymore. The modern day chef understands agriculture, nutrition, science, and also has a personal interest in self-development, whether spiritual, emotional, or physical. And I think that's like the new soul as well, the new person. Like, we're expanding in the growth wise, and I'm sure that's quite exciting, to see that as well in your field as well.
Absolutely. I think that there's I truly believe that it's time for a new generation of chefs or cooks, right? Because in the future, with everything that's going on in the world, we've got produce is expensive. People can't even buy eggs. It's in some parts of the world don't have anything. So I really think that chefs are going to have a much bigger responsibility. It's not going to be enough just to know how to cook. Farmers, we're running out of farmers. Farming is being decimated. Yep. I think, and I think it's something that it makes sense for me to have a cook, a chef, understand how to grow their own food the way we used to do it hundreds of years ago. Obviously now, there's a lot more people on this planet, and we need to think about that. But, but if it would be a lot more beneficial if we can team up, chefs, farmers, agriculturists, you name it. If we teamed up, doctors, nutritionists. I know a lot of nutritionists that can't cook, and I know a lot of chefs that know nothing about nutrition,
Yep.
but you're dealing with the same thing,
The food pyramid, how it's like the wrong way. Yeah.
Yeah, it's none of it makes sense, right? But if we all kind of got together, look, this is a long-term goal, obviously. I think it's going to take time to really establish that. But look, there's things that we can get started on now, and I know a lot of chefs that are really into that. So there's a starting point. It could be quite scary to think about. Okay, how are we going to do this? But we have to do it, and there's always a lot of talk of. And look, don't get me wrong, I'm all for sustainability. I really am. But sometimes I speak to people who are very, very, it's got to be sustainable. This, that. I get it. I totally get it. But you also have to think about how many mouths we have to feed on this planet, and being sustainable, unfortunately, is quite expensive.
Yeah.
So how do we do that? And for me, rather than spending so much time talking about sustainability, great. For me, I think it's more about the balance, and that's what, again, I'm not anti-sustainability. I'm all for it, but you can't create sustainable food and expect to feed millions and millions of people, because it takes so long to do that, So and that involve, and I'm talking about the farming aspect of it. Everyone wants to eat organic. Okay, well, how long does that take? How much can you actually produce? There's all these different layers, all this math that you got to think about.
Yep.
Look, if the whole world could eat that way, that'd be amazing. Why are families so poor that they all they can afford to eat is McDonald's and fast food companies and buy processed foods? We need to figure out how to make it accessible, and rather than just focusing on small parts of it all, which is why I think it's about the balance. Yeah.
I agree 100%. And often we just say like big buzzwords and we don't know what that means. And also when we talk about like certain topics, we neglect the poor soil, which is the most important thing.
Yeah.
The GMOs, which are banned in Russia, pesticides, Bovaer, seed oils, so many other nasties, and people don't actually, and I'm sure most people probably don't even know half of what we just spoke about as well.
Yeah.
It drives me nuts, but I love that you're building towards a higher goal of higher awareness, because when we have higher quality food and practices, it's actually better for the whole. Like, we're destroying food in so many different ways, but I love that you've got that goal. To wrap up before we go, have you found the inspiration? What's next for you? What's the next big dream and goal?
I really want to, I'm writing an idea for a show where I get to really explore and discover a lot of what we've spoken about, which is, no matter how advanced technology gets and how advanced we get, we always refer to the past, of the things that we've achieved in the past.
Yep.
Which means, a lot of the way a lot of methods, that indigenous people created are methods that are still being used today, and a lot of those methods, there's a lot of methods that have been lost, which are even more beneficial and make more sense, because, to be able to work with the natural cycles of what we do is probably the absolutely the best thing that we can do. And especially incorporating all the technology that we've got, how do we make that process easier? But I think that if I can find a way to really, and a lot of this also is the educational part. You need to make this accessible, and you need to really give people the knowledge, and which is why I'm trying to write this sort of show/documentary where I go all over the world. I speak to farmers from all types of cultures, chefs from all types of cultures, doctors, and we talk about sort of what they're doing to make things not only accessible, but how are they teaming up with the technology that's just growing at such an enormous rate.
Yeah.
And I find it interesting that we've got the ability to come out with the most incredible iPhone, yet so many people are still starving, and why are we, why have we gotten to the point where something as simple as an egg is so expensive? Like these are questions. I'm sure there's a lot of people wanting to know those questions and know the answers to those questions. But I think that we need to, rather than allowing, other people that have no business telling us how to eat and what to eat and what to consume, we need to be having these conversations with the people that actually do this stuff, and really be respectful of that, because if not, we're going to lose it. So that's my main goal with this series that I hope to achieve. That it's in the process of writing, and hopefully that could be the catalyst to the new holistic chef that I was talking about.
I believe in your mission. That is something that resonates deeply with me. Let's do a rapid fire segment to wrap up the podcast. How was working on the Center app with Chris Hemsworth?
A lot of fun. So many incredible trainers, nutritionists. It's just a little snippet of what's possible when we're talking about holistic. So it was absolutely fun, especially because, like I said, Chris is so, health for him is such a priority that, for him to be able to be a part of that team and him to get all those people involved on an app that's reaching so many, it's a great thing.
And I believe you also have done some of the guided meditations in it as well. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, I have. Yeah, somehow someone thought my voice was good enough for it. Okay, sure.
That's a nice compliment.
Yeah.
What's your go-to ice cream flavor?
Vanilla. I love with proper vanilla beans.
Yeah, that's also rare. But does pineapple belong on pizza?
Ooh, look, I love sweet and salty, but sorry, not on pizza.
Thank you. I won't comment on them, but I needed to hear that. What's the one dish you haven't been able to master?
My grandfather's rabbit stew. He passed away, unfortunately, before he gave me the recipe. Actually, he never really had a written down recipe. It was done just by intuition. But I've been trying to do it ever since. I still haven't nailed it, but I will.
You will get there, yeah. Living in Byron, what has it done like for your awareness with health and wellness? Has it changed your perspective or just been with more like-minded people?
Definitely being with more like-minded people, because there's a lot of creatives here. So it's nice to have the balance.
I was so close to moving there. You're making me regret it. Did you ever think you would be on TV?
Yeah, I did. I had a very specific idea as to how, but yes.
And how was your first time on TV? What was that experience like?
It was scary and incredible at the same time.
And first time on MasterChef?
That was scary. Well, only because you're in front of God knows how many people.
Yep. What are you most proud of?
How I've managed to really listen to my intuition throughout the years.
Nice. How do you want to be remembered?
By understanding, but actually, I would have to say, being remembered by someone who understood the importance of nourishment, and by that I can mean self-nourishment or consumed.
Great answer. What would you do if you knew you could not fail?
I would figure out a way to feed everybody in the world.
Any advice you want to give to people who want to try something different on you, but perhaps a bit fearful of doing so?
I would say learn to love fear. Fear is one of the most incredible things that you can master. It's incredible. Fear is what gives you the fire.
Oh, I'm plugging that everywhere. I'm going to put that as my ringtone. Last question before I ask how people can follow you and keep up to date with you. What's the one question I should have asked?
Why didn't you stick to music?
And what's the answer to that?
Oh, you know what? I would have to say I was probably afraid of it. I think that I'm extremely sensitive to music. I'll cry at an opera. I'll cry at a classical piece. It truly is. The music is our own soundtrack. It's soundtrack to our lives. And I honestly think that if I would have gone into it, I would have been, who knows, maybe not. But there was definitely this fear. It wasn't a frightful fear, but almost overwhelming feeling. Yeah, it's hard to explain, but yeah.
No, I get it. But, as we've said, you're still playing. You're going to be a film composer as well. You're going to put it in, hopefully, that show that you're talking about. And, you're playing in general. So I'm very excited. Before we go, how can people follow you and keep up to date with you?
Well, obviously, no one can be without Instagram. So it's definitely my Instagram account, which is Sergio.Perera. My website is going to be up and live on this coming Tuesday, the 27th.
Oh, okay.
So it's going to be a way to be able to kind of reach out to me and kind of to read a little bit about what I do and what I plan to do. So I'll just kind of keep updating all that on a weekkly basis.
What did you say the website?
Yeah, that is Perera Sergio at .com.au.
Okay, I'll put that in the episode notes and your handles. Thank you so much. I love your mission. You're an inspiring guy, very uplifting and empowering, and I am very excited to see what's next for you. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Lots of fun. Thanks so much.
I love how Sergio talks about changing the relationship with fear. Like us all, sometimes we can allow fear to get the better of us. Sergio, however, has decided to flip the switch and embrace the fear, allowing himself to use it instead of letting the fear get to him or restrict him. To me, this is brilliant, as often we hold out the cuffs and let fear guide us. But Sergio encourages us to look deep within and walk through it. Once changing that relationship with fear, Sergio explains it becomes an incredible tool to master. It gives you fire to succeed and thrive. So I'll leave you with this epic quote. Don't be afraid of your fears. They're not here to scare you. They're here to let you know that something is worth it. C. Joy Bell, C. Thank you for listening to the Funny and Failure podcast, exploring the deeper side of comedy.